In the year 1842, in the deep heart of Georgia's cotton empire, stood the Whitfield Plantation, one of the grandest estates in the state. Stretching across miles of shimmering white fields, it was ruled not by a man, but by a woman the locals both feared and admired. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield, the widow who carried herself like a queen in a kingdom built on cotton, power, and silence. When her husband, Thomas Whitfield, died suddenly of fever, Eleanor inherited everything: the land, the wealth, and more than 200 enslaved souls. Neighboring planters whispered that no woman should control such an empire, but the widow never listened to anyone except herself. Behind the polished columns and Sunday church smiles, she nurtured an idea that would one day stain her family's name forever. Each night she sat beside the dying fire in her husband's study, staring at his ledgers and at a cracked portrait of her 5 pale, beautiful daughters. She traced their faces with her fingertip and whispered, "They have my grace, but not his strength." Strength to Eleanor meant dominion. It meant power. It meant control. And she became obsessed with one idea: improving the Whitfield bloodline, even if it meant bending every law of nature and morality. The plantation moved like machinery, the overseers shouting, the cotton gins clattering, the enslaved bending under the blazing sun. Eleanor watched everything from her balcony, still and cold as carved stone. Among the workers, one man stood out. His name was Josiah. Tall, silent, strong-shouldered. His gaze could cut through stone, and even the overseers were uneasy around him. Sold from Virginia years ago, he carried himself with a strange, unsettling calm. The first time Eleanor saw him, it wasn't desire that flickered in her eyes. It was calculation. She said nothing that day, but her stare lingered too long. By the next month, Josiah was moved closer to the main house, given lighter work, and kept within the widow's sight. Everyone on the plantation knew nothing Eleanor Whitfield did was ever without purpose. Late one night, she stood before her mirror, watching her youth fade in the candlelight. Her eldest daughter, Marianne, was nearly 17, the same age Eleanor was when she married. She whispered to herself, "The Whitfield name must not fade. I will build a stronger line." Then she touched her husband's portrait and said softly, "You failed to give me a son, but I will finish what you started." And so the plan began forming, dark, forbidden, and unholy. The next morning, Josiah was summoned to the main house. He stood before her, sweat glistening down his back after a full day's work. Eleanor looked him over with quiet intensity. "From now on," she said, "you work under my direction. The overseer answers to me." To the others, it sounded like a promotion. To Josiah, it felt like a warning. As the sun set behind the fields, the whispers began. "Miss Whitfield has plans for the tall one. Ain't it no good come when a white lady stares too long at one of us?" And deep inside that grand mansion, the widow's obsession took root, an obsession that would soon pull her daughters, Josiah, and the entire Whitfield estate into a storm of madness. The summer of 1843 came in like a fever. The air over the Whitfield plantation felt heavier than ever, thick with heat and something no one could name. Cicadas screamed from the trees. The sky seemed always on the edge of storm. Even the workers in the fields moved slower, not just from exhaustion, but from unease. Because by then, everybody knew. The widow had chosen someone. One humid morning, Josiah was called to the veranda of the big house. Eleanor Whitfield sat in a high-backed chair, lace fan moving slowly in her hand. Her daughters watched from behind the curtain, their pale faces framed in the glass. "You are Josiah," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am," he answered, eyes lowered. "I've heard you're strong, obedient, capable of hard work." He nodded once to her. She leaned forward, her voice sharp but calm. "From today on, you will work near the house. I'll have tasks for you personally. You'll do them exactly as I say." To anyone listening, it sounded like a reward. To Josiah, it felt like a cage. That night, the cicadas cried from the fields and lanterns flickered in the slave quarters. Josiah sat outside the small cabin he shared with 3 other men, staring into the dark. He said nothing, but his silence was heavier than usual. Ruth, the older house servant, arrived with a chipped bowl of stew. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "They say Mistress got plans for you," she whispered. "You best be careful, boy. Ain't no safety in a white woman's favor." Josiah didn't answer, but inside, memories rose like ghosts. He remembered Virginia, his wife, his child. The day he was sold and torn away from them like pages ripped from a book. He had promised himself one thing that day. He would never let them break what it was left of him. Now, on this Georgia plantation, under this widow's gaze, that promise began to tremble. Over the next days, Josiah was given new duties near the main house. He repaired doors, hauled wood, fixed shutters, always under the watchful eye of Elena Whitfield. One afternoon she ordered him to fix the roof above the parlor. From her balcony, she watched as he climbed, the sun burning his back, sweat shining on his skin. Her eldest daughter, Mary Ann, stepped beside her. "Mama," she asked quietly, "why are you watching him?" Elena did not turn her head. "A mother must choose carefully, my dear," she replied. "The future of this house depends on strength, not softness." Mary Ann's stomach twisted. She didn't fully understand, but she understood enough to be afraid. That night, she heard the servants whispering in the kitchen. When she finally pieced together what her mother's plan might be, sleep would not come. A week later, Elena did something no one had seen before. She ordered Josiah to serve wine at the family dinner. The long table glowed with candlelight. The daughters sat stiffly in their seats, their hands folded in their laps. Josiah moved silently between them, pouring wine, eyes lowered, jaw tight. Elena watched him the whole time. "Strong hands," she said aloud, her voice smooth as silk. "Hands that could shape destiny." Mary Ann's spoon fell from her fingers, clattering against her plate. The youngest girl, Clara, stared wide-eyed at her mother, sensing something wrong without having words for it. When the meal ended, Elena dismissed everyone. Everyone except Josiah. The hallway fell silent. The daughters lingered on the stairs, hearts pounding, listening. They heard slow footsteps, the creak of a door closing. Then nothing. From that night on, Josiah became a shadow inside the great house, always nearby, always useful, never free. The servants stopped laughing in the kitchen. The daughters stopped speaking at dinner. Even the overseer avoided the veranda, pretending he didn't see what the widow was doing. Elena, meanwhile, spent her nights in her husband's study, writing in a black leather journal. On one page, in perfect neat script, she wrote, "The new Whitfield line will rise from strength. My daughters will bear greatness." One evening, when the sky outside burned orange and the air smelled of dust and magnolia, Josiah finally found the courage to speak. They were alone in the study. Elena stood near the window, the last light of day touching her face. Josiah stood a few steps away, shoulders tense. "Mom," he began slowly, voice low. "I mean no disrespect, but this—" He hesitated. "This thing you ask of me, it ain't right." Elena's expression hardened, like stone left in winter. "You will do as I say, Josiah," she replied. "You owe your life to this house. You belong to it, every part of you." He lifted his eyes then, meeting hers fully for the first time. "Not as a slave, as a man." "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "No one owns my soul." The words fell heavy in the room like thunder rolling over distant hills. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then something in her gaze changed. Curiosity died. Obsession remained. And beneath it, something colder bloomed. Fury. From that night forward, Elelanina Whitfield watched Josiah not as a tool, not as a vessel, but as a threat to her design. The overseer was ordered to keep him under closer watch. He was never left unwatched, never allowed far from the house. But the whispers had already slipped past the fields. A widow, a slave. A plan so unnatural that even other planters looked away and pretended they knew nothing. By the end of that summer, every soul on the Whitfield estate understood one thing. The mistress of Whitfield House would not stop until someone or something stopped her. And soon, her obsession would turn away from Josiah alone. And toward her own daughters the storms of late summer rolled across Georgia like omens. Thunder rattled the windows of the Whitfield mansion, and the air felt tight and breathless, as if the sky itself knew what Elelanina Whitfield was planning. Inside those tall white walls, the true rot had begun. Mary Ann's awakening. Mary Ann Whitfield had always been the obedient daughter, quiet, proper, graceful. But in the last few weeks, she no longer recognized the woman who raised her. Her mother's smiles had grown sharp, her eyes hollow, her voice laced with a madness she hid behind scripture. Mary Ann had noticed the way Josiah moved through the house, silent, guarded, always followed by someone. She had seen the way her mother watched him, not with desire or hatred, but with purpose. A purpose that made Mary Ann's blood run cold. One night, while candles flickered low in the drawing room, she finally spoke aloud, the fear that had been burning inside her. "Mother," she whispered, "what you're doing, what you're planning, it isn't right." Elelanina didn't even look up. "What is right," she said, her pen gliding across paper, "is what preserves the Whitfield name." Mary Ann stepped forward. "At what cost?" The widow finally turned. Her face was pale, lit by a sickly glow from the candle. "At any cost, child. Weak families die. Mine will not." Mary Ann's heart clenched. For the first time in her life, she feared her mother. The parlor gathering. The very next morning, Elelanina summoned all 5 daughters to the parlor. The doors stood wide open, letting in thick magnolia-scented air, but not a single girl could breathe easily. Josiah stood near the veranda, eyes lowered, trapped in silence. Elelanina rose slowly from her chair, her voice calm in the most terrifying way. "My daughters," she said, "you are my legacy, my pride, my purpose." Her second daughter, Louise, spoke timidly. "Mama, people are talking. The preacher's wife said." "The preacher's wife is a fool," Elelanina snapped. "She knows nothing of destiny." The younger girls exchanged fearful glances. Clara, the smallest, began to cry softly into her hands. None of them understood the full horror of the plan, but they understood enough. Their mother wanted something from them, something they could not give. Something no child should ever be asked to give. Mary Ann breaks. That night, as the others slept restlessly, Mary Ann could not close her eyes. The candles in the hallway cast long shadows across her room. She had seen the journal earlier, her mother's black leather book filled with chilling messages. The blood must mix. Josiah is the chosen vessel. My daughters will bear a new line. her stomach twisted with revulsion and fear. Unable to endure the silence, she crept downstairs and slipped outside into the warm night air. The cicadas screamed louder than ever, as though warning her. She found Josiah walking along the edge of the fields, moonlight outlining his tall figure. "Josiah," she whispered. He stopped, but didn't turn. "She's not well," Marianne said, voice trembling. "She's losing herself." He finally looked at her, calm eyes filled with a tired sadness. "I know," he said quietly, "but she won't stop until someone makes her." Marianne's breath shook. "If she continues, she'll destroy us all, my sisters, and you." Josiah nodded slowly, the weight of truth settling on him like chains. "Then maybe it's time," he whispered. "Someone stops her." Her eyes filled with tears. "If you try, she'll kill you." He gave her a sad, almost peaceful smile. "Maybe, but I'd rather die standing than live bowed." The widow's eyes. By morning, Elenina Whitfield sensed everything. She saw Marianne avoiding her, saw Josiah's defiance, saw the fear in her daughter's eyes, and fear to her was weakness. Weakness was sin. Sin had to be controlled. She tightened her hold on the household. Daughters were no longer allowed to walk alone. Whispers were punished. Doors were locked at night. Elenina dressed the girls in white gowns, claiming she wanted a family portrait. But even the youngest knew it wasn't true. Something darker waited behind her icy smile. Something unholy. The journal of madness. One evening she summoned Marianne into the study. The black leather journal lay open on the desk. "Read it," she ordered. Marianne's hands trembled as she picked it up. She scanned the words, her breath catching. "The new Whitfield line shall rise. Josiah will give my daughters the strength their father lacked. God has chosen me to purify our blood." Marianne looked up, horrified. "You can't mean this." Elenina stood slowly, her face cold as winter stone. "It has already begun." Marianne backed away, voice cracking. "You're destroying us." "No," the widow said quietly. "I'm saving us." Marianne fled the room, heart racing. She ran straight to the servant quarters. Ruth listened as Marianne, trembling, whispered the truth. "She's gone mad. She will use him. She'll use all of us." Ruth placed a weathered hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Child, your mama done sold her soul to the devil already. You best find a way out." The house holds its breath. That night, thunder rolled across the plantation again. Elenina Whitfield wrote one last line in her journal before blowing out the candle. "The seed is chosen, the future is near." But the old house seemed to moan in the wind. The daughters cried quietly behind locked doors. Josiah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing something terrible was coming. And in the dark, the widow Whitfield smiled because in her mind she had already won. She did not know that everything she built would soon begin to crumble. The rain returned like judgment that night, pounding the Whitfield plantation with a rage that felt almost divine. Thunder crawled across the sky, rattling the windows and shaking the grand columns of the mansion. Inside, the candles burned low, flickering against the wallpaper like ghosts trying to escape. Elenina Whitfield moved through the halls with a slow, deliberate calm, her mind sharpening into something cold and unrecognizable. The daughters followed her footsteps with wide, frightened eyes, each one too afraid to ask what their mother intended. Even the servants walked silently, as if sound itself might provoke the widow into madness. The preacher had visited earlier that day, leaving in pale silence after witnessing the state of the house. Rumors had begun to spread beyond the plantation, whispers that the widow had lost her senses, that the Whitfield name had turned rotten. Elena, however, seemed untouched by shame. She dressed in a dark silk gown, her hair pinned tight, her face glowing with a feverish light. She ordered the servants to clean the parlor, light every candle, and close all curtains. Her daughters were told to change into white dresses, matching, spotless, and eerie in their purity. None of them believed her lie about a family portrait anymore. They knew this night meant something else. When Josiah was summoned to the main hall, a terrible quiet sank into the house. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled against the shutters. Elena stood before the great door with her daughters trembling behind her. The candles reflected in her eyes, turning them sharp and unnatural. "It is time," she said. Her voice was soft, almost tender, and yet it carried a chilling weight. Mary Ann stepped forward then, breath shaking, hands trembling. "No, Mother," she whispered. "This ends tonight." Elena's expression hardened instantly, as if her daughter were a stranger. She hissed, "You forget yourself." But Mary Ann's fear had finally broken into courage. "You forget God," Mary Ann cried, tears in her eyes. "You forget decency, humanity, everything Father stood for." The widow's lips tightened into a thin, cruel line. "You will obey me." But before she could take a step, Josiah moved. Slow, steady, unafraid, he placed himself between mother and daughter. His presence filled the room like a shield. "This house ain't holy, ma'am," he said quietly, "and your God wouldn't want this." The words struck deeper than any blade. Elena's breath hitched. Something in her gaze flickered. Pain, rage, disbelief. But the madness did not loosen. Instead, it tightened. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The candles flickered. Rain crashed like a river on the roof. Outside, lightning split the sky, casting a white flash that made the room glow. Mary Ann looked at Josiah, eyes full of fear and hope. Her sisters clung to each other, whispering prayers under their breaths. The servants stood frozen in the doorway, torn between terror and silent relief that someone had finally spoken the truth. And Elena, the woman who once held her family like a crown, stood trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that her control was slipping. Then, the moment shattered. Elena screamed, a raw, furious cry ripped from the depths of her obsession. She lunged forward, but Josiah caught her wrist mid-air. She gasped, stunned to be touched, held, stopped. The daughters stared with wide, horrified eyes. For the first time, the widow looked small, not powerful, not chosen, not holy. Just a woman drowning in her own delusion. Josiah released her slowly, but the damage was done. The facade had cracked. The house itself seemed to exhale, as if relieved that the truth had finally surfaced. But Elena Whitfield was not finished. She never stopped. The rebellion had begun, but the cost of defying the widow would soon become a nightmare. No one in the Whitfield household could escape. The storm did not ease. It grew worse. By nightfall, the entire plantation trembled under sheets of violent rain and rolling thunder that cracked the sky in two. Lightning lit up the fields in blinding flashes, making the Whitfield mansion look like a haunted monument, its tall white columns shimmering like bones in the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with tension and fear. The failed ceremony had shattered something deep within the household. Elena's screams still echoed in the daughters' memories, her hands clawing at the air, her fury drowning out any sense of reason. She had been dragged away by 2 servants, and even then she fought like a trapped animal, shouting words that made no sense. Words about destiny, bloodlines, chosen vessels, and God's will. Upstairs, Marianne sat locked inside her room, her face pale, her heart pounding as thunder shook the walls. Her mother's rage had turned into something more dangerous than madness, something violent. She could hear Elelanina pacing the hallway outside, her footsteps uneven, her voice muttering sharp, broken prayers. The younger girls huddled together in their rooms, crying softly, too afraid to step into the hall. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow felt alive. Marianne knew the truth now. If they stayed until morning, someone would die. The widow was no longer a mother, no longer a protector. She was a force, wild, unhinged, and desperate to force her will on everyone beneath her roof. Downstairs, Josiah paced in the shadows near the servant quarters. Rain dripped from the rafters, soaking the ground beneath his feet. His jaw was tense, his breath shallow. He had stood up to the widow, publicly, directly, and he knew exactly what that meant. Come dawn, the overseer would be armed, the dogs unleashed, and the widow would unleash every shred of her power to punish him. Escape was no longer a choice. It was survival. When he entered the dimly lit cabin, the other servants looked up immediately. They saw the determination, no, the fire, in his eyes. He spoke in a low whisper. "It's time. Tonight." There was silence first. Everyone knew the punishment for fleeing: chains, lashes, or death. Then the oldest woman in the room, her hands wrinkled and scarred from years of work, stepped forward. "I'll help," she said softly. "Lord's done waiting on this place." That broke the tension. Quiet nods followed. Quick, silent actions. Bread wrapped in cloth, a jug of water, a rusted lantern with barely any oil left. Josiah grabbed an old knife used for cutting cane. His hands didn't shake, but his heart did. He was not just running for himself now. He was running for Marianne, too. In her room, Marianne finally gathered the courage to break free. She listened to the storm, waited for lightning, and pushed at the door. The latch stuck. She whispered a prayer. Thunder cracked. She shoved harder. This time it gave way. Barefoot, she ran through the hall, her nightgown trailing behind her like a ghostly veil. She heard her mother's voice somewhere upstairs, sharp, broken, dangerous. But the storm swallowed the sound. Marianne slipped down the stairs and into the back hall where the shadows were thickest. She found Josiah at the door, drenched in rain, lantern in hand. Their eyes met, fear, hope, desperation blending in the dim light. "You came," he whispered. "I wasn't staying," she breathed. "Not after what she's done." Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Elelanina's voice cut through the storm like a knife. "Marianne, where are you?" They froze. Thunder exploded above them. Then Josiah grabbed her hand. "Now," he said. They ran into the rain. The storm hit them like a wall. Wind tore at their clothes. Mud slowed their steps. Branches whipped at their skin. But they did not turn back. Behind them, a window burst open. Elelanina's scream ripped through the night, her voice shrill and inhuman. "Traitors, both of you!" Thunder swallowed her words, but the rage inside them was unmistakable. Josiah and Marianne sprinted past the fields, the wet cotton brushing their legs like ghostly fingers. When they finally reached the tree line, Josiah turned back. The mansion stood in the distance, lit only by flashes of lightning, an enormous, looming shadow, a dying kingdom ruled by a mad woman. But escape was not freedom yet. The storm clouded their tracks, but dawn would bring hunters. Josiah knew the overseer would release the dogs, and the widow's fury would drive her to follow them herself. Still, they pushed forward through the forest, hearts pounding, breath broken, soaked to the bone. Josiah whispered, "We make it to the river, we stand a chance." But the night was only beginning, and the hunt had already begun. What awaited them by morning would become legend. The storm swallowed the night whole. Trees bent under the weight of the wind, and lightning carved white scars across the sky as Josiah and Marianne ran deeper into the woods. Their breaths were sharp and broken, their clothes clinging to their drenched bodies. Mud soaked their feet, branches snagged their skin, and the roar of thunder rolled like drums behind them. Every sound felt too loud, every shadow too close. They could not stop. They could not look back. They both knew Elelena Whitfield would not sleep, would not pray, would not rest until the two souls she claimed as her own were dragged back to her doorstep, alive or dead. By dawn, the rain eased, but the danger grew worse. The sharp crack of the overseer's whip echoed in the distance, followed by angry shouts. Dogs barked, deep, vicious, hungry. The hunt had begun. Josiah tightened his hold on Marianne's hand and pulled her behind a cluster of cypress trees. "They close," he whispered, catching his breath. Marianne could barely stand. Her nightgown was torn, smeared with mud, blood on her palms where thorns had ripped her skin. "We can't outrun dogs," she whispered, her voice shaking. Josiah looked at the ground, at the mud, at the footprints they had left behind. "We don't outrun them," he said softly. "We hide long enough to get to that river." But the dogs found the trail first. Their howl tore through the forest like a warning from hell. Josiah spun around, pulling Marianne into the shadows. "Stay low," he said. The first shot rang out, splitting bark inches from his head. Marianne screamed. Torchlight flickered between the trees as the overseer's men stormed forward. Josiah didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen branch, heavy and sharp, and stepped into the torchlight like a man facing judgment. The overseer aimed his rifle. Josiah swung first. There was shouting, another gunshot, then a heavy silence. Marianne pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling down her face as she crouched behind a fallen log. Minutes felt like hours. Then through the trees, a figure staggered back toward her, limping, wounded, blood on his arm, but alive. Josiah. He dropped to his knees beside her, breath ragged. "It's done," he whispered. "But more coming. We ain't safe yet." They pushed forward through the forest until the trees opened into the riverbank. The water was swollen from the storm, churning violently, dark as night. Marianne stared at it in horror. "Josiah, we can't cross that." But he looked at the water with the calm of a man who had nothing left to lose. "We ain't got a choice." Behind them, more torches flickered. More voices shouted. Elelanina's scream rose above them all, a sound so sharp and twisted it cut through the roar of the river. "Marianne, Josiah, you belong to me." Rain began again, fast and cold. Josiah took Marianne's hand. "Hold on," he said, "no matter what." Together they stepped into the freezing water. The current slammed against them. It dragged at their legs. It pulled like unseen hands trying to rip them apart. Marianne stumbled, choking on river water. Josiah wrapped an arm around her, fighting the current with every ounce of strength he had left. Behind them, at the edge of the trees, Elelanina appeared, her black cloak whipping in the wind, her hair wild, her eyes burning like a woman possessed. Lightning lit up the sky, revealing her fully, pale, furious, trembling with madness. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just stared. A mother watching her own legacy slip from her grasp. A woman who built her life on control, watching everything she touched dissolve into water and storm. One final flash of lightning. One final cry swallowed by thunder. And the river took them. Marianne and Josiah vanished into the dark water, their bodies swept toward the swamps, hand in hand, until the current ripped them away from sight. The dogs stopped barking. The overseers lowered their torches. and Elelannina Whitfield sank to her knees at the riverbank, her scream drowned by the storm. By morning, the plantation was silent. The servants hid. The daughters stayed upstairs, refusing to leave their rooms. The preacher's horse stopped at the gate, but he refused to step inside. And Elelannina, after a night of wandering the halls, whispering to herself, was gone. Her bed empty, her Bible open, a single verse underlined in red. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. After that day, no one lived long in Whitfield House. Travelers claimed the windows stayed open even in winter, though no owner lived there. Children swore they heard weeping during storms, and some said they saw a tall, shadowy figure near the riverbank, his skin glistening as if still soaked. Others whispered that a pale woman wandered the halls calling her daughters names. And on nights when the river flooded, locals insisted you could see two shapes standing hand in hand at the water's edge, a tall man and a young woman looking back toward the mansion that damned them. The curse of Whitfield House was born that night. A curse of pride, obsession, and a mother's madness. The story the world tried to forget. A warning carved into the bones of Georgia's soil. And if you ever find that old road lined with oaks, listen when the rain begins. Because some say the widow still whispers through the thunder, the blood must mix. And if you hear that, run.